I think society tells us that you'll be all better if you can just afford this vacation, if you can just buy a Beamer, when you can fly private. But the reality is that I had to fall in love with the process. The miracle is the attempt. The gift is that you get to try, because there's so many people who are born into circumstance throughout this world who never even get the chance to try.
You're watching Young and Profiting Podcast on YouTube. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Hala Taha, and on Young and Profiting Podcast, we investigate a new topic each week and interview some of the brightest minds in the world. Before we get started, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified every time we drop a new video. Hey, Josh, welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am super hyped. For those who don't know and who might be living under a rock, you are a young comedian and actor. You actually started on Nickelodeon shows like The Amanda Show and The Drake and Josh Show, which pretty much defined the TV consumption of most millennial childhoods, especially those younger millennials. And in fact, I have a lot of 25-year-old-ish girls that work for me, and they were freaking out that you were coming on the show more than Matthew McConaughey being on the show. That just goes to show that you are truly an icon of our generation.
Well, it's a great honor. And if you really sit down and think about it, McConaughey's fine, good actor, but, is he offering up what Peck's offering? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and since your Nickelodeon days, you've had multiple film and millennial roles. You've become a huge social media influencer with over 20 million followers across Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And on top of everything, you're now an author with your new memoir, Happy People Are Annoying. So let's start there. What's up with the title of your book? Why are happy people so annoying?
Well, my book agent told me that'd be a good title, and I realized I should go with the people whose business it is to sell books. I'm only half joking. I wrote a 30-page proposal for this book, and I had no title. And initially, I sort of was working with titles like The Millennial Guide to Survival or Everything I Wish Someone Had Told Me. And I didn't love any of those, but as you know, like there's nothing easy about titling anything, your podcast, your book, your kid. And so once my agent read the proposal, she sort of pitched this idea, and in a weird way, the book sort of grew into the title, which was like this idea that I'd gone throughout my whole life assuming that like happiness, or what I thought it was reserved for people who were generationally wealthy, attractive, the quarterback. And I just thought that I didn't receive the same sort of manual for living that everyone else had been given at birth. And my journey facing challenge and trial and walking through it has helped me to sort of define what happiness is for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I have to say, your memoir was super easy to read. It was inspiring. It was funny. It was relatable, even though I'm not an actress and never did acting before. But I related to a lot of things that you said. And, I feel like a lot of people who read your book did as well. And I think my audience is going to really resonate with your story. So let's start up with your childhood. You grew up in Hell's Kitchen. You had a single mom as a mother. You never met your father, and you were up and down financially as a child. And at 8 years old, you actually started developing your love for comedy and ended up doing stand-up. So let's start there. How did you first get into performing?
I think just having a mother who was sort of like this unrealized performer, like her great love has been musicals and singing and just kind of stand-up comedy. She's just a natural entertainer, and she used that superpower to be a great business person. And yeah, we certainly struggled financially, which I don't think is a new experience for anyone with a single parent, especially a woman in the 80s, like having to deal with all like sort of like that toxic masculine workforce, and what she was sort of, those waters she was navigating, I would imagine required her to sort of arm herself with those tools of like, when I walk into a room, I'm going to crush it with a joke immediately, and then you're going to know who has the power here. So I knew immediately, like, there's a currency to like having the ability in which to take over a room, and comedy can be that superpower. And even at 8 or 9, it doesn't matter. You're immediately upgraded to the adult table as soon as you prove that you're funny.
That's super, super interesting. So how did you kind of hone your chops? Like, how did you practice and start to learn initially?
I think I was just obsessed with television and sitcoms, and talked about my best friends growing up were Billy Madison and Ace Ventura and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Like I didn't know that I was sort of putting in my 10,000 hours. I just thought that I was obsessed with TV like all my other friends were. But in a weird way, I was like absorbing the rhythms. And comedy is very if art is for the most part subjective, but there is a justice to comedy, and that if it doesn't get a joke, it's really hard to interpret that it worked. So I like the idea of being like, there's no debating this. If I get a laugh, and laughter, kind of like crying, is involuntary, right? Like there's no interpreting that. I got it. And I get the pat on the back for that one.
Okay, so you started performing at Caroline's, and I think that was one of your first big breaks as a kid. And then you ended up being on Conan O'Brien and the Rosie O'Donnell show. What was that like when all of a sudden you were starting to get all this attention and being on national television? And I'm sure you started to feel a little bit different from your peers. What was that like?
I don't know. It wasn't that much attention in the sense of like on a public level. I think it just, I don't know if it would have been any different than being like, oh, Josh is the young, exceptional tennis player, or Josh is exceptional at an instrument, right? Like there are certainly plenty of skills that kids tend to shine in early on if they cultivate that. And acting was just my thing, and I think we're all trying to be special at that age, and this was my sort of helping of special.
Yeah. And so it seems like your mom was really supportive throughout your journey, but actually people like your grandparents really thought that there was no lifelong, career trajectory as an actor, and they thought it wasn't really a stable profession. So how did you kind of move through that, even though there were some naysayers in your life?
I think just inherently there were people in my life, like, family members. I mean, people had no problem, especially then in the 90s, like giving their opinion about how ridiculous it is that, the idea of having a full realized life in this crazy profession, and their pragmatism or their nervousness isn't without reason. Even now in today's day, I would say, look, if my son told me that he wanted to be an actor when he was 18 or 19, I would certainly be like, are you sure you don't want to be a dentist? How about teeth? Maybe you should try teeth. Because it's a crazy business. It's a big swing, even though I feel like many of us feel like we all have some actor in our life, or some performer, or some influencer nowadays. It still is the lesser taken path. And because of that, it affords you some really big wins and possibilities for greatness, and also a lot of uncertainty. So it was understandable. But I went to Performing Arts High School when I was 12 years old. And I remember I was suddenly surrounded by people. I mean, my school had alumni like Claire Danes and Jesse Eisenberg and Alicia Keys, but even maybe not as big as they were, just like working kid actors who were on Broadway shows or TV shows. And I was like, well, they're making grown-up money. So suddenly it seemed possible, because I was, making $20 a weekend performing at Caroline's, certainly not enough to pay your rent. But I was like, wow, these kids are doing the thing that I love, and they're making a grown-up salary. Like maybe this is possible.
Yeah. And so you believed in yourself enough where at one point in your memoir, you talk about meeting the president of Nickelodeon for the first time. And you were in love with the show All That, which is like the kids' version of Saturday Night Live, for those who don't know. And you mustered up the courage to actually tell him that you wanted to be on the show. So I'd love for you to share that story and some of the lessons that you learned.
Well, I would audition for Nickelodeon a lot as a kid, and the Viacom headquarters was in a building called 1515 Broadway, which I imagine is still there, and it sort of had all their subsidiaries housed in this gigantic building that if you watch MTV now, or have for the last 25 years, whenever they're doing back in my day, there was a show called TRL, but like whenever you see them sort of overlooking Times Square, that is 1515 Broadway. So I would audition at Nickelodeon all the time. And I would basically tell them, like, listen, I'm young, I'm funny, and I'm chubby. Like, you need me. Trust me. Like, I have the secret sauce. And they were like, well, maybe we need you, but we'll see. And slowly but surely, I would do a commercial or do a TV show for them. And then I booked this movie called Snow Day, which was my first movie. My mom and I fly to Canada, first time out of the country. And one day I'm just like chatting with some guy who had a great laugh, and I'm giving him some of my material from stand up. And my mom sort of sidles over to me and is like, do you know who that is? It's the president of Nickelodeon. And she said, you should tell him you want to be on all that. Because until that point, I could not get a call back for all that. I would audition, I would pray, I would try to suck up to the casting director, but I was just not what they were looking for. And so I tell him that, and 9 months later, I got a call from him saying, congratulations, I'm going to move your mom and you out to California, and you're going to be on the Amanda Show. And I don't know what that lesson is other than shoot your shot.
Yeah. It is shoot your shot, and don't be afraid of asking for what you want, right? I mean,
so.
You had the courage to ask for what you want, and it didn't, turn out exactly how you wanted, but it was a huge step in your career that I think really changed your life. So how did that turn up to you getting a show with Drake Bell on Drake and Josh? Because Drake and Josh was really like your mega hit that I think everybody knows you from. I'd love to hear about how that turned into you leading the show with Drake, and also, the best and worst parts of you being on that show.
Well, we were both in the Amanda Show together, and initially I was sort of iced by the producers of that show because I think they were sort of strongly encouraged to put me on the show by that president. I'm not sure that idea was theirs. So initially I just kind of sat around watching people like Amanda Bynes, who was so much more talented than I was, and seeing like what her secret sauce was and trying to learn from her instead of resenting the fact that I was kind of sitting on the bench. And over time, I figured like, well, eventually, like they're paying me and I'm here. So I imagine they'll give me a shot. And they did, and it worked out in my favor. And so when Nickelodeon needed a new buddy comedy, Drake and I were just a really good option. And that's what sort of led to Drake and Josh. And I think the best part of that show in hindsight is the fact that, 20 years later, people still talk about it, that it still means so much to families, and that they let us into our homes, which is a very like privileged opportunity, even more so than like, everyone wants to be in the gigantic Marvel movie or like the big, huge blockbuster. But there's something special about having a show that like the whole family can sit around and like watch in their living room. It's very intimate. And I think that's what the show has been for a lot of people, and even generations now, which is really special. And I think the hardest part of the show was just I was sort of introducing myself to the world in a body that I wasn't quite comfortable in because I was pretty overweight. And I think navigating those waters of being a public person, getting to do something that I dreamt of doing, while also feeling like just massively insecure they were challenging waters to navigate.
Yeah. So I want to stick on this for a point because I think this is a really important piece of your story. So my team always gives me quotes and stuff in my research, and there was a couple that really stood out, and they were, "The reason why people are funny is usually not funny." And you have another quote, "Real artists take the misery and sadness out of life and translate that into art." So is there some real reason why like you were funny as a kid? Like, was it more like masking this insecurity that you had? I'd love for you to share more about that.
Certainly. I mean, when I meet like really attractive people now that try to go joke for joke with me, I always want to say to them, like, listen, there's a chance I'm funnier than you, but trust me, I'd trade it for a second for your face. Like, I would have traded it all, but certainly, because why not? I mean, listen, I live a pretty like normal life, all things considered, but being a public person, like I'm not gonna delude myself. Like I do get like a little bit of special treatment here and there, like maybe it's easier to get a reservation at a restaurant. I mean, I'm not that fancy. Or like I'll be like at a coffee shop and people will be like, oh, it's on me, and I'll be like, don't give me the free coffee. Like I can afford, like, and,
Yeah.
but and so I have to like remind myself of like, oh, like most people don't get this, Josh. Like, so have an understanding of like your privilege. Um, Attractive people get that all the time. Like a lot of people grow up that way, right? Where they're just like, oh, people are so friendly. I'm like, yeah, to you. And so I just think that the need in which to create this defense mechanism to sort of navigate your way through the world isn't necessary for certain people, but for a guy like me, it certainly was. And there's a legacy of the big funny guy, right? So it made sense. Maybe if I grew up in a really athletic community, it being the big guy, it would have made sense to try to go be an offensive lineman for my high school football team. But in New York, growing up with the mom I had, it was to be funny and entertaining.
I love that. It's like you use that as a way to kind of shine and be likable, even though you felt like on the outside you weren't just being liked for your looks. You got to be liked for your personality, basically.
I think so. And I think there was a need to, I felt like I walked into situations at a disadvantage, that people made a snap judgment about me being that weight of like, oh, you lack willpower or you're slovenly or something. And I didn't want to be that great. I just wanted to be at an even sort of at the same level as everyone else.
Yeah. So something that I found very, very interesting, growing up watching Drake and Josh, everybody thinks that you're super rich and that, you made it for life off that show. But it turns out you were only paid like $100,000 a year for like 5 years or something on that show. And it really was tough after it ended to continue to monetize that fame because there was no social media. Hollywood in the 2000s is very different from Hollywood now. So I'd love for you to kind of share some more on that and give us some color about that situation.
It's gross to talk about money, but the reason I felt compelled to do it was that I believe there was this misconception of like what a guy like me coming from that show, where we should be at in life the moment it's over, fiscally, and just sort of how much runway you actually have. And I remember this woman, after she read the book or saw some excerpt from an interview, was like, I work with kids and I make 50 grand a year. Like, who are you to say this? And I was like, ma'am, first of all, no one is debating you that you should be making way more money and what you do is way more important than what I was doing. I just think the difference is that no one thinks you're making $1 million a year, but a lot of people thought I was. And so I think the reality is, when you finish a show like that, if you're making a middle-class income, you only have a year or so runway if you've been smart with your money before it's important to find another job, especially if you're sort of helping support the family the way that I was at that age, which was my honor because my mom sort of gave up so much of her life to come help me. So I think it was challenging, and I think naturally we see kids like that, and if they do have to do a job to pay the bills, which maybe isn't necessarily some Oscar award-winning part, but it's just something that's sort of again, for a paycheck, we instantly judge them and think like, what'd you do? Blow all your money? Like, what are you, just some cliche who had a Bentley or something? When in reality, there wasn't as much as people thought.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And, it's kind of sad. Like, I feel like Nickelodeon, you probably feel like did a lot for your career, but do you ever feel like they sort of took advantage of you considering how big that show was and how little money you made off of it?
I don't, in hindsight, I don't really, yes. No, I'm kidding. I don't complain and I don't begrudge it because I'm lucky enough to be so happy with where I'm at now. And I think things are certainly better from what I've heard.
So what happened after you ended Drake and Josh? How did you pivot, considering that your television career was over?
I mean, my television career wasn't over, right? The show was over. So I think that's not the best way to phrase it, because it's like your career isn't over as an actor until you stop acting. So it's just what's next, right? So that's really what it was. What was next? So I wound up starring in this movie called The Wackness with my favorite actor, Sir Ben Kingsley, and Method Man and Mary Kate Olsen, and we wound up winning Sundance. And it was like this indie movie that I dreamt of doing because, at 21, what I really wanted my whole life was just to be an actor. I didn't want to be a movie star, and I certainly didn't want to be a child star, and I didn't want to be the funny fat guy. I just wanted to be an actor amongst actors. And I remember getting that opportunity. And that movie you mentioned, Mean Creek, was something I did at 16, and it was sort of like my first foray into, because I loved doing the kind of stuff I was doing on Drake and Josh, but it came a bit naturally to me, just being sort of like big and funny and shticky, and that was a huge part of me. But movies like Mean Creek and eventually The Wackness, that was another side that I really wanted to explore, something more grounded and subtle, because those were the sort of movies I loved growing up.
Yeah. And so, we're looking at you right now. You're pretty fit, but back in the day, you were about 100 pounds or so heavier, right? You were a bigger guy, and you were often typecast, like, as a big, funny guy. How did you feel that limited your potential in any way?
Well, it just limited me as long as I wanted to stay that way. Back then, bigger guys were limited to sort of two kinds of roles, which was the bully and the best friend. And Mean Creek, actually, that movie, I was playing a bully, but it was the first time I actually got to play this fully realized person, because he was sort of this tragic character, this kid who so desperately wanted friends. The only way in which he knew to sort of do that was to sort of antagonize kids just so they would notice him. And and I remember when that movie came out and it was so well received, and I thought, I can't wait another 10 years for another part like this to come around, like for a big guy to actually play a real person. So I lost the weight, and there were certainly people who were like, right now you're part of like a pool of 4 or 5 guys, vying for these roles. But if you lose weight and you get down to a normal weight, like you're going to be going against Jake Gyllenhaal for roles. Like, are you sure you want to do this? And obviously, Gyllenhaal doesn't have to audition for movies. He's so damn handsome and talented. But like, they basically were saying the pool is much wider if you are at an average, in quotes, weight. But I knew that I wanted to be able to play those other roles, and it was necessary for me, in addition to all just the inner reasons I did it, that I wanted to be healthier and more comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah. And so you had tried many, many diets before that. What did you do to actually get the weight off?
Oh, it's just boring. I just ate better and worked out more. And I feel bad saying that because people always want some kind of hack. I know I did at that time. But I guess the only thing I can ever say to people who are on their own journey to perhaps lose a bit of weight or get healthier is, I was just sort of sick and tired of being sick and tired. I tried so many different ways, and inevitably I just had to be so I had to feel completely over my way to try it someone else's. And so I always say to other people, if you're feeling hopeless or you're feeling like your way doesn't work anymore, I'm sorry you're going through that, but it's a great place to start. And pain can be a great motivator, and you never learn anything on a good day.
I love that. Okay, so you lost all this weight, you accomplished this big goal, and you eventually turned to another vice other than food, and that was drugs and alcohol. And in the book, you described the first time you ever did drugs, and you say that it made you feel typical. What do you mean by that it made you feel typical?
I think I'd spent my entire life up until that point. I was having this very specific experience. I was working in this adult career as a young kid since I was 12 years old, and there was a lot of responsibility. Mayim Bialik, who I'm a big fan of, especially because she's done this beautiful job of transitioning from starting as a young actor and sort of growing up into this great adult performer. She said, when as an actor, you're not really allowed to have a bad day. Now, I'm sure there's there are plenty of examples of actors having bad days on set, but it's very important that you come and you show up ready to do what you have to do, because there's a lot of money riding on it. And so I think that was my life up until I was 18, 19 years old. And I felt like I had to be sort of very measured with everything I did because I had so much riding on it. As opposed to what a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds want to do, which is to be frivolous and a bit reckless and basically stupid. And so when I was 18, 19, and I was experimenting in these ways, I felt very typical, and I had lost all this weight, and I felt like I was making up for lost times, I think.
That's so interesting. And so you got down this rabbit hole of drugs. How did that impact your relationships at the time, and how bad did it get?
There's the saying that your bottom is whenever you decide to stop digging. And I think that was a big part of it, where I had this career that I'd worked so hard at for so many years, and I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. And so quickly I realized that this experiment, while it felt necessary in the moment, would start to really have diminishing returns. And that it was really, it was imperative for me to sort of get my life on track, because I don't know, my true north has always been this work. I've loved doing it since I was 8 years old, as I said, I fell in love watching television. It's the thing, television was my babysitter. It was my best friend. I left the TV on at night just to feel like there was someone there, so that the room never got too dark. And so it has sort of always been this driving force that somehow has kept me on the right track throughout my life.
Yeah. And so what was the turning point? Can you share the story when you realized that like you have to get sober, and that like enough was enough, and you wanted to kind of change your life for the better in that way?
So I lost 100 pounds and I thought I'd be all better. And then I wasn't. I was still the same head, just in a new body. So then I tried drugs and alcohol, and that didn't work either. And so then I figured, well, success and prestige, maybe that'll work. So I do this movie, as I talked about, the Wackness. And as I said, like, my dream when I was 16 in that movie, Mean Creek, was to one day come to the Sundance Film Festival, which at this time to me was like better than the Oscars, and to be thin and to have like a movie I was proud of. And it came true. Like, I was 21, and I remember the movie was screening there, and like Quentin Tarantino's at the screening, like these heroes of mine. And I'm working with my hero, Sir Ben Kingsley. Like, I'm an actor nerd. So for me, this was like Michael Jordan. And that night the reviews start coming in, and they're beautiful. And it was truly everything I'd ever hoped for. And I think I imagined that I'd wake up the next morning and the old Josh would be gone. That voice inside my head that woke up a few minutes before I did every morning, that told me all the reasons why I'd never be enough, that it would just be gone. And I woke up the next morning and that voice was still there. And it was like this terrible realization that I said, oh no, I'm bottomless. It had been like a suspicion I'd had my whole life, that no matter what I try to fill that hole in the soul with, it'll just never be enough. And I remember I flew home that day, and everyone who was part of the movie was like, are you nuts? Like, you're going home? This never happens. Like, you never have a hit movie at a festival like this, and you're just going to leave? And I was like, yeah, I got to get out of here. And 2 weeks later, I got sober. And I think it was that realization, and also taking some action, that allowed me to do that.
Wow, that's a really, really powerful story. And thank you so much for sharing that. So what you said reminded me of this thing called the arrival fallacy that people keep mentioning on my podcast. And basically what that means is like you achieve something, and you're like waiting and waiting, and you think everything, you're going to be happy finally when, like, once this happens, I'm going to be happy. And then it happens, and then you're like, oh, now I have to find the next achievement to like dangle in front of my face until I'm happy. So what has your whole career journey taught you about achieving happiness?
It's a great question. I love the way you phrase it. I think society tells us that, right? Like, you'll be all better if you can just afford this vacation, or you'll be all better if you can just buy a Beamer, or you'll be all better when you can fly private. But the reality is that, like, I had to fall in love with the process. The miracle is the attempt, the gift is that you get to try, because there's so many people who are born into circumstance throughout this world who never even get the chance to try. And so the fact that you're like maybe in a place where there's some financial insecurity or just life insecurity, but you get to put your best foot forward and work your butt off, like that's a gift. And I have to remember that. And it's every corny slogan is true. It's about the process, not the result, and all these things. But for me, it's never been, luckily, about the billboard. It's never been about like going and doing some cool red carpet thing or all the cash and prizes. It's just I really like the moments between action and cut. It's a puzzle for me. I remember I've had this great like year last year of I was working really consistently, and I'm working on this really cool thing now, and I'm so lucky. And so I've been in acting class the last couple months because I was like, don't get rusty, stay primed, stay ready. And I remember I did this scene, and my acting teacher goes, well, you really didn't consider this, or yeah, you missed this. And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, I'm never going to be perfect at this thing. Like, it's like this puzzle that has a hold on me. Like, I just want to figure it out, and I'll never fully figure it out, even if one day I do it superbly, and the verdict's still out on that. So I'm lucky to have a thing that really grabs me still.
Yeah. And it's more like you're not necessarily basing your happiness on achieving that next big gig. You're basing your happiness on, being the best actor that you can be and enjoying your craft.
I think we all want to succeed. We're all bombarded with hustle, 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 and, cram as much sort of optimize your life, cram as much as you can into a 24-hour period. But like, what has helped me is finding the virtue in what I do. And it's easy to think as an actor, like, what's virtuous about what I do? It's self-serving, just to like, so that I can get more followers and make more money. But the reality is that, people live really hard lives, and they come home and they turn on a show and they lose themselves in it for an hour or 2 hours or 20 minutes. And they can forget about their troubles or what's going on in their family or their boss who's a jerk or whomever, and just kind of feel like a relief that washes over them by watching what, an actor or a producer or director is able to provide. So like there's virtue to that. So that's a reason to do what I do and to make it about something bigger than me. Because if it's just about me getting that next role because I really want the announcement on Twitter, then it's never going to be enough.
Yeah. And I feel like people can relate to that no matter what profession they're in. And so you're an actor, right? And acting is a tough business. And I actually was really happy that in your memoir, you didn't try to cover over the fact that it's really a hard business to be in. There's lots of ups and downs. So I'd love to understand how you dealt with all the downs.
Therapy, support, good friends, being sober, and never laying down. I've heard someone say, if you're walking through the shit, just try not to sit down. There were so many moments where I wanted to quit. There were so many moments where I was just like looking at my life at 32, 33 years old in audition room for the I don't know, maybe I've gone on 1,000 auditions in my life. And for the 900th time being like, I thought I'd be further by now. I thought I wouldn't have to do this at a certain point. And here I am still singing for my supper. But I also am very comfortable in that place. And, every time I've done something, I did a show with John Stamos where I played his son on this Fox show, which I wish I could, time travel back to 13-year-old Josh and tell him that one day we'd be able to pass for John Stamos' son and that everything was going to work out and that maybe I should hold back on seconds. And that show was this great thing and everyone was like, this is the moment. And then, that show was a great experience and then got very canceled. Or last year I did this show for Disney Plus, Turner and Hooch, so proud of it. One of the best experiences And that show only went one season. So like I'm comfortable in that place of like, go to an audition, get the pages, memorize it, go in there and realize that nobody's really thinking about me. You know, I'm there to serve a purpose. Hopefully, I can help whatever puzzle this writer or director has set up for themselves, where they're like, I really got to fit these roles. Like, maybe I can be that guy. And if I'm not, well, maybe you're closer now to who you're supposed to pick because you realize someone like me is definitely not who you need. You know, and I've heard that said before about auditions. Like, you're either going to help them by being the right guy for the role or help them get closer to realizing who they don't need. Either way, you're of service. And I have to remember that.
Yeah. So many great lessons I feel like that you're sharing right now. Something that was super interesting to me was that in your book, you say that you tell people that your life either existed BRD or ARD, before the film Red Dawn and after the film Red Dawn. So how did you deal, since we're talking about rejection, how did you deal with the criticism of that film? And how did you sort of reinvent yourself after that?
Well, Red Dawn was just sort of like the amalgamate or sort of the apex of all the things that I thought I needed in my life. But I basically was like 23 playing Chris Hemsworth's brother, which sounds crazy to me too. Don't worry. And I thought my whole life I was like, this was what I wanted to be, was the badass action star, when in practice, I was so full of imposter syndrome that I actually let it turn me into a fraud. And I let go of everything that had always been working for me. And the result was this very stilted, uncomfortable, not great performance in the movie. And I was sort of just, I took a lot of flack for it. But I think it's important to like flop and keep going and normalize flopping, you know, and I'm glad I got to do it at a time where I was young enough to where I could really learn from it. And that, you know, I just, it had to happen. And in the moment, I really thought like, this is it. When this movie comes out, I'll die. And it came out and the reviews came out and I just kept walking. And I think that's important to know. And I don't, you know, on my podcast, Male Models, I've been lucky enough to interview like serial entrepreneurs, Gary Vaynerchuk and, you know, Damon John. And I remember I asked them, how long do you mourn a loss when a company doesn't, you know, quite live up to expectation or something falls through, a deal or something? How long do you let it affect you? And they both like literally took a moment and said minutes. And I was like, really? Because I like to be wounded. Like I like to take weeks to get over things. But I was like, yeah, that's how you do it, right? Like that's how you become as successful as them. You just keep pushing.
Yeah, it's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how quick you get back up. And it must be tough being an actor because a lot of us who have more normal jobs, you know, you might do bad at work one day or even get fired, but it's not like plastered all over the internet. Nobody knows. So it must be even harder when you're an actor and you're getting all these outside people kind of giving you that negativity. How did you stay positive even when the world was being so negative? Like any thoughts around that?
But it's so transient. Like even, I mean, obviously if you do something that's like pretty egregious, you're going to pay for it. But if you have a misstep, I feel like now in today's media, especially, like you'll pay for it for like 1 24-hour news cycle. And then people will move on to like whatever Kim and Pete are up to, you know, like, so I think it's just about, you know, being unreactive in those moments. I mean, we're all human. We're all in glass houses. There's the potential for any of us to mess up. And I really believe like inevitably your character is your fate. And, you know, I also think that if you have a misstep or you mess up, people tend to do a forensics of your life. And they say, well, has he done anything in the past that would warrant this behavior? Or does he tend to make this mistake a lot? Or is this what he really believes? Like people will look. And if they go, you know what, from what we can tell, this person's a good person. They're just human. They said the wrong thing. And they're, you know, making an effort to correct it and apologize. And so I think that's important.
Yeah. So like we said before, when you ended Drake and Josh, surprisingly, you had no social media following because social media wasn't really a thing back then. There was no like influencers yet, right? So you actually started your social media journey on Vine. I'd love to hear about what got you started on social media, how you kind of got your first big break, and how you parlayed it into the millions of followers that you have today.
I mean, the show ended in 2007, so it wasn't even like social media wasn't even remotely a thing. Like it was, Facebook had been around for what, 2 years? But other than that, I mean, YouTube existed kind of. Um, in 2013, I made my first Vine because I was a fan of the app. And for anyone who doesn't remember, it was like the original TikTok. And suddenly I started to get these followers. And I remember thinking after a couple months when I had about 100,000 followers, it was a real inflection point. Like I could really lean in or maybe stop doing it and people would have just forgotten. And I even had agents and managers calling me at that time saying to me, like, what are you doing? Like, we're trying to make you not just like the goofy guy from that kid's show. And you're like making, silly videos in your car. Does this hurt us? And I was really lucky to have an apostle during that time, my buddy Rami, who worked in social media early on. And he said, listen, Josh, don't let anyone tell you they know what this is because I work in it and even I don't know. But I'll tell you that being able to go straight to your followers, affecting hundreds of thousands of people, finding out what they like, what they don't like, and everything in between, that's powerful. So do this. Do it every day. And that's what I did. I made a Vine a day. Because until that point, I'd always been at the mercy of the gatekeepers. I'd always needed 5 people to sign off on me for me to get a role, and then 18 months before it came out. But suddenly I was going straight to my audience. And, with the hit of, with the click of the upload button, I could deliver content. So as long as I didn't have an ego about the way in which I was doing it, and as long as I didn't think, well, I really need a trailer and some fancy coffee if I'm going to be acting, and instead said, this is your job, so just do it, whether it's on your phone or for an IMAX camera. And the result was really great, and it grew to a good amount of success on Vine, Instagram, YouTube, and even TikTok, and it brought me here now.
Yeah. And honestly, I love what you're saying. You're basically saying for a long time, and I always talk about this, for a long time, everything that you did required a gatekeeper to say like, yes, you're welcome, Josh. Like we pick you, we choose you. Now you get to create your own life because you own it. You own these social media channels and you can communicate directly with your followers and monetize that. So I think that's super powerful.
I think it's so necessary. And in 2013, The Rock didn't have 300 million followers, and Kevin Hart and Jack Black weren't on YouTube. Like it wasn't as normal then. So it was a bit more of a leap. But I think the line has totally blurred between traditional and social media people. And I think now it's just about the content. And it afforded me security to get married, buy a house, have a kid that I don't know if acting would have ever given me.
I love this. Thank you so much, Josh. So, what are you up to today? What's new? What is coming out for you?
Oh, I have this movie called 13 the Musical coming out August 12th on Netflix, and I'm on How I Met Your Father right now on Hulu, and and just making TikToks and chatting with you, and my podcast, Male Models, that I'll plug. I'm a fan of that.
Okay, cool. So we'll stick all those links in the show notes so you guys can follow Josh. And so I always ask 2 last questions at the end of the show, and then we do something fun at the end of the year. So the first one is, what is one actionable thing my young and profiters can do today to be more profiting tomorrow?
Oh, wow. It's a great question. I would say just find someone today that you can do something nice for. Ideally, because we're talking about young and profiting, like someone in the business space, figure out just someone who can do you a favor down the road, figure out how to do a favor for them today.
That's a really good piece of advice. And what is your secret to profiting in life?
Oh, profiting in life. Yeah, I mean, it sort of connected to that first thing. I mean, look, doing nice things for other people, becoming indispensable, helping people. I mean, it has an immediate payoff because of just the karmic sort of payout, which is immediate, right? You feel better. It's the best way to get out of self. But if you do these things, what you'll find is when people are in a position then to spread goodwill, to pay it forward, when they have an opportunity, you're going to be at top of mind, right? Like people go out and they become super selfish and they're like, no, I have to wrestle money and prestige and goodness from the world. I got to go out and get mine. And it's like, well, good luck, because no one's going to think of you first for anything. But if you've got a great track record of being there for people, of being, a reliable, good source of good work, then the moment they have an opportunity to spread that goodwill, they're going to think of you first.
That is such a great lesson. Thank you so much, Josh. I love this conversation. I think my audience is going to love it. Where can everybody go learn more about you and everything that you do?
I guess just follow me on Instagram, Shua Peck.
You're like, just Google my name.
I don't know.
Josh Peck.
Thank you so much for having me. I really love chatting with you. You're awesome at this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh. Great conversation. Thanks for listening to Young and Profiting Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please write us a review or comment on your favorite platform. Nothing makes us happier than reading your reviews. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and on social media. I always repost, reshare, and support those who support us. You can find me on Instagram at Yap with Hala or LinkedIn. Just search for my name. It's Hala Taha. Big thanks to the Yap team as always. This is Hala signing off.